This reminds me. I need to tell my players they got inspiration last session. Hello adventurers, I am the Welsh DM, the one Welshman whose accent got forgotten about in the back of a rulebook. Now D&D 5th edition is obviously an incredibly popular game and has seen an incredible amount of success since its launch, told a lot of different stories and everyone has had a lot of fun with it. And yet, there is an element to the game that I often see is overlooked or forgotten about entirely by both players, GMs, and even the design team. The inspiration system, back from 2014, or heroic inspiration as it's now known in 2024, is a really innovative, interesting mechanic that I don't think ever got its time in the limelight. It remains a tiny section of the player's handbook, and yet I believe if you start adopting it into your game and thinking about how you can use it and opening up its possibilities, you will see a significant impact at your table. I love inspiration, and I hope to use this video to convince you that it is also an incredible mechanic and why you should use it more in your games. I'm sure many of you do already use it, but I'm hoping I can open your eyes to the true potential of the system, and ultimately what I hoped the 2024 revision was going to do with inspiration, rather than what we did get in the end. Before we get into what we can be doing with inspiration, it's worth taking a look at what its original purpose was meant to serve. The 2014 Player's Handbook wrote that it was meant to be a reward that GMs could hand out to their players when they roleplayed their character correctly. It was distinctly tied into the bonds, flaws, and ideals system of the 2014 Player's Handbook that I spoke about in our previous social encounters video. And at the time, this was a great idea. TTRPGs were beginning to slowly shift away from the pure combat dungeon crawl focus of the 90s and early noughties and into a more roleplay heavy space. And inspiration was adopted to help GMs encourage this. It ensured there was a tangible, mechanical reward that could be given to players for engaging with the fiction in the story, buying into the world, and committing to the character they had created. And it handed GMs the ability to reward the kind of behaviour they wanted to see at the table from their players. However, I think as idealistic as that was, most of us will probably agree it's a bit too much of a burden to put on the GM to track even just 4 players' ideals, bonds, and flaws at all times and remember to hand out inspiration. And so, eventually, inspiration just kind of faded into the background, yet another rule that nobody really remembers what it was for or how to properly use it. And it wasn't exactly helped by shows like Critical Role or Dimension 20 never mentioning the system at all in their games. But despite all of that, I still believe it is a good mechanic, and so clearly did the design team, because they carried it through to the 2024 version of 5th edition. In 2024, it still basically runs the same, it's still basically the same mechanic, but the directive on how and when to hand it out for GMs has been removed from the handbook. Instead, heroic inspiration, as it's now known, appears in certain species and class features, handing out heroic inspiration directly rather than having to go through the GM. Which is one way, I suppose, to make the mechanic turn up. It's clear the design team, Jeremy Crawford, Chris Perkins, etc. really love inspiration but couldn't really figure out what to do with it. Some people have compared inspiration to the Fate Point system from the Fate RPG, a token that allows a player to shift the fiction of the story when they need to most. And they get this by committing to certain actions that the GM then rewards. It's almost a feedback loop, inspiration serving the purpose of pushing the story forward in more exciting ways from previous exciting actions. When the players commit to their character, do incredible roleplay, or just perform heroic deeds, we want to reward them with the ability to have a meaningful impact of the story another time. Unfortunately, inspiration, as good as the original intentions were and the possibilities that could have come with it, it didn't land at most tables. And I think this was caused by 2 main factors. The first is the hoarding fallacy that plagues RPGs, and the second was the mechanic was ultimately relatively meaningless in play. The hoarding fallacy of RPGs has plagued video games for years, and it's basically the premise that players will not use consumable items like health potions, mana potions, or damage boosts to their weapon because they're worried about needing them again down the line. And so they end the game with hundreds of these items completely unused. And Inspiration suffered from the same problem in 5th edition because you could only ever have one inspiration at a time, which meant players were constantly thinking, what if I need this reroll on a death save next round? What if I need it to avoid a natural 1 in the encounter that we've definitely got coming up? And so they never used it, leading to players hoarding their inspiration for clutch moments that may never happen. Which is fine, players may want to hoard it for that dramatic moment in the final boss scene, but when you're not interacting with a mechanic on the regular, it's very hard to remember that that mechanic exists when you need it most. And it meant that GMs couldn't continue to hand out inspiration because everyone already had it and just weren't using it. Daggerheart has its own version of this with the hope mechanic, and it goes out of its way to highlight how often players are going to generate hope so they know they can spend it freely. And the most important thing about having a mechanic is interacting with it. And inspiration as a mechanic is kind of meh. If you've played D&D 5th edition, even a modicum of an amount, you'll discover it is really easy to roll with advantage, which is essentially what inspiration is doing. It is allowing you to roll another d20. So when you're running around with a barbarian with reckless attack, the help, action, conditions that apply to monsters like restrain that allow you to roll with advantage, getting that extra reroll doesn't feel quite as special. Nor does it encourage creativity in the players. If I'm a player who gets given a juicy golden reward for committing to a piece of dramatic roleplay or performing a heroic deed for the NPC, I kind of want that reward to do something in a similar vein. Which is where my alternative inspiration system comes in. What can we do to resolve those issues with inspiration and begin engaging with it in meaningful ways at our tables? Fundamentally, I think what we need to do is make it mean more than simply re-rolling a dice. And then combine that with giving our players the ability to do it more often. So, step 1, let's increase the amount of inspiration a character can have at any one time. In Unrolled Stories, we have a house rule that characters can have an amount of inspiration equal to their proficiency bonus at any one time. This allows me as a GM to hand it out far more freely because I'm usually fairly confident they have an available slot for the inspiration, and it allows the players to spend it more freely because they're less worried about not having a critical one when they need it. Sure, they might hoard that last one to use for an important thing, but at least they've used the 2 or 3 they had otherwise. So now that the players have more uses of inspiration, we want to give them more diverse and interesting ways in which to use it. Specifically, ways that let them be cool, ways that let them do heroic deeds, or ways that just let their character appear cool in the moment. As mentioned, what we're trying to do is generate a feedback loop with inspiration. Players do something cool or story significant. They get given inspiration, they then use that inspiration to do another cool, impactful moment down the line. Through this, our table sees more awesome stuff happen and we normalize those risky, harebrained, daring moves, creating a more cinematic and memorable game at our table. It's a win-win all around. Now, it's all well and good me saying let your players use inspiration in more diverse ways, but that doesn't directly help you. So how about some ideas? Firstly, before we go any further, the reroll system for inspiration is actually quite good. Don't get rid of it. It's a nice fallback option for your players in those clutch moments. But at my tables, I offer a few other options to my players, the most prominent of which that I've seen used the most is the get down mechanic. Simply, a player can use their inspiration to jump in the way of an attack that is going to hit an ally within 5 or 10 feet. This allows the tanks to tank and to have that heroic moment where they take the arrow for the heavily wounded sorcerer. I also like the I Know a Guy system, first introduced by David Nett on Twitter. This allows the players to invent an NPC up on the fly that fits into the world that will help them with the current plot hook they're trying to deal with. It helps to remind players that they're allowed to add to the fiction of the world, and this is a collaborative storytelling experience. Just because I didn't think of an NPC that could help with them in this moment doesn't mean they haven't, and it could create a really compelling NPC down the line. And also, I will have that NPC betray them, inevitably. Don't tell them that. Recently, and perhaps most interestingly, at my tables, I've started to see players use it as a bargaining chip when they're trying to push the envelope of what the rules allow. They got it for doing cool things, and now they want to use it to do more cool things. Perfect! That's exactly what I want out of the system. An example of this is the Goliath Ranger Bullrick in Unrolled Stories, spending their inspiration to be able to pick up a bandit, use their Goliath strength, and hurl them upwards off a roof to deal additional fall damage. Perfect use of inspiration in my opinion. It allows Bulric to do a cool heroic thing by showing off their Goliath strength, and it adds a mechanical benefit like dealing a bunch of damage to that bandit as they crash into the floor. It's an excuse to lean into the rule of cool without feeling like you're setting a precedent that could be exploited later on. I don't think my Goliath Ranger is going to continue to try and use their Goliath strength to hurl people off roofs, but they might. Alternatively, when a character is rolling death saving throws, let them spend an inspiration to automatically succeed on one. Again, it doesn't break the game, but it adds a little bit of comfort to the players, and what better way to reward them committing to the roleplay with their character than to ensure that character lives to see another session. And lastly, my favourite idea that I sadly haven't yet seen being done yet at my tables is the combo party move. This is somewhat inspired by a similar system, again, in Daggerheart. I get the feeling I'm going to talk about Daggerheart a lot in the next few months. But I promise I did come up with this system long before Daggerheart was even announced. I have proof, you can check out my website. Fundamentally, 2 or more players can combine their action, potentially out of initiative order, by spending inspiration, combining their attacks and combinations to have a devastating effect on the enemies. As a GM, add additional damage, additional conditions, or a fundamental shift to the combat arena that everything's taking part in to reward the creative concept that your players have come up with. One particular use that I like the idea of is 2 spellcasters combining spells to invent a brand new effect that could fundamentally shift magic and blows up my entire encounter. If my players decide to combine their powers and fundamentally break the encounter that I spent all week designing, I'm not gonna care, because it's probably gonna be so awesome. I'm gonna be living in that moment. And that is what we want inspiration to do. There is all manner of ideas you can come up with at your tables that'll fit your players and your fun. These are just the ones that I use at my table, so have a think of which ones will work best for your players and which ones your friends will have the most fun with on game night. And be open to off-the-cuff ideas from your players as well. Variety is the spice of life, after all. Anyway, in case you couldn't tell, I think inspiration is a really cool mechanic that is sadly quite underutilized in D&D. And by the design team at Wizards. It brings roleplay and bold action to the fore in our games and encourages players to think outside the box and push for those dramatic moments, while also providing GMs with a tool to encourage the kind of play they want to see at the table. I always particularly loved how Johnny Chiodini handled it in the Oxventure series by essentially using inspiration to reward terrible puns, because that's what made everyone laugh at the table and created the kind of atmosphere they wanted. Look, all I'm saying is don't overlook the kind of impact inspiration can have at your tables. Give it a chance, see whether the alternative inspiration system works for your table. If it doesn't, fine, go back to using the rerolls or just not using inspiration at all. But I think you'll have more fun with it than you think. If you've experienced the wondrous possibilities of inspiration at your table, let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your stories, especially if you've got creative ideas for uses of inspiration that I and others can steal. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. It does help inspire the algorithm to show this video to other people. And if you enjoy this kind of content, why not subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell notification icon as well to make sure you never miss a video. Anyway, I do believe that's everything I have on inspiration. So, until we do this again, you keep an eye out for dragons. I'm going to go use inspiration to get my accent back. And remember to keep telling stories.